Hello and welcome to all watching us on Vidhik from EMRC Patiala. Today we are going to talk about a very interesting subject, the history of music, and that too in colonial Punjab. Today we have with us Dr. Radha Kapuria, lecturer of South Asian History at University of Durham, UK. She has recently come out with her new book from Oxford University Press, Music in Colonial Punjab, Bards, Courtesans and Connoisseurs. As we all know that music has a ubiquitous presence in our lives. Yet, if we look at the Indian scenario, the works on the history of music can be counted on fingers. So, in that way, Radha Kapuria's new book has been a very landmark research, as she has brought on the table the area or the region of Punjab, because Punjab is otherwise considered a land of rustic and folk culture. Whereas Radha's book talks about the rich tradition of classical music in Punjab. So, before I invite Radhaji, let me just give you a brief introduction about Radha. Radha has published widely on music in all the leading journals like the Indian Economic and Social History Review, South Asian Diaspora, Economic and Political Weekly, and many others. So, welcome Radhaji.
Thank you, sir. It's a pleasure to be here with you.
So, Radhaji, my first question would be, why Punjab? And before you answer, Punjab is a state. Beyond that, Punjab has been a wider region. And as I have read your book, and you have argued that the regional boundaries of Punjab have been very fluid. But the thing is that if we read the concept of region geographically, it is not as fluid as your book shows. Region is more than anything else a geographical entity. So, would you tell us a little bit about why Punjab and what are the regional specificity of Punjab and why the regional boundaries of Punjab, especially in the field of music, have been quite fluid?
That's a really good question, and I'll try and answer it as concisely as possible. So, I think why Punjab? Because all histories of music so far have looked at the so-called heartlands of Hindustani music, like Awadh, Lucknow, and what we consider as the centers for classical music, like Calcutta in Bengal or Mumbai in Maharashtra. What was ignored in these accounts was the history of music in this wide Punjab region. So, I think I started with a micro history of Jalandhar's famous Har Vallabh Music Festival, which you had done the first research in, and that's how I met you. And I did then my MPhil on the Har Vallabh Festival of Jalandhar, which is the oldest classical music festival in all of South Asia, which is still running, started in 1875. But when I started doing this research, I found a lot of references in the archives to Lahore, Amritsar, Jalandhar in the colonial period. And I was very curious to know what was happening in these cities with regard to music, because I found references to Sangeet Sabhas and music circles in the 1920s and 30s when I looked at the newspaper, the Tribune. So I knew there was a lot of material waiting to be looked at in the archives. Punjab was also the origin point for many musicians who travelled to other courts, say to the court of Baroda or to courts even in South India or elsewhere. So, I felt that the region had been neglected and we needed to see what was happening here. And of course, Punjab is also unique because, as we know, it's the entry point into South Asian subcontinent. So, it's the bridge between Central Asia and South Asia, which also makes it very unique as a cultural location. So, you are quite right that the boundaries of Punjab, merge into Himachal speaking regions, Haryana in India, and in Pakistan it is bordering Sindh and other linguistic regions. But I think the heartland of Punjab, which is say the cities of Lahore, Amritsar, and on east side Jalandhar, Kapurthala, Patiala, this needed to be looked at in a serious scholarly manner.
Radhaji, normally it is said that Punjab means either it is Punjabi pop or it is Bhangra or it is Gidda or it may be the sound of dhol or tumbe. So, what reasons have been there that this kind of a particular imagery of Punjabi music has become the only image of Punjabi music, whereas we all know that Punjab has been the seat of a very rich tradition of kind of the Sikh devotional music and Partal Gayaki, and even a lot of ragas have been mentioned in Shri Guru Granth Sahib Ji. And on the other hand, we also come to know about very famous Drupadiyas of Punjab. So, how this particular stereotype has emerged? Would you tell us a little bit about this?
It's a very interesting question. I think the answer lies in the post 47 imagining of India as a land of unity in diversity, and I think this idea that different regions represent different qualities. So, I think in that imagining, in the sort of Nehruvian era, we had this idea of Punjab as the land of agriculture, of folk, and therefore agriculture, folk, rustic. These became the stereotypes, but the roots of this lie in the British colonial period, because as Navyug Gill, the historian who has worked on agriculture in colonial Punjab, says that when the British defeated the Sikhs in the Anglo-Sikh wars, the martial warrior Sikhs, they were quite literally trying to convert swords into plowshares and to reimagine these martial warriors as peasant agriculturists. And of course, they did a lot as well, canal colonies, and the British tried to make Punjab agriculturally productive in a new kind of way. So, this became the dominant image. The Jat peasant came to stand for Punjab, and so this became a sort of stereotype which really stuck. But I think the reason that this stereotype has prevailed is also because of partition, because with partition there was a cultural disruption. Our memory of Punjab as a land which enjoyed Drupad, as you were saying, famous Drupadiyas, the Harvallabh festival started as a Drupad Mela, so did the Durgyana Mandir's Rag Sabha, Lakshmi Narayan Rag Sabha, and so many other regions in Punjab where Drupad was popularly enjoyed. This memory was lost. With the modernization of music, Drupad was in any case replaced by Khayal. And so, I think with the disruption of partition, India, in the Indian side, the folk image became prominent in the state funding of folk music and folk culture in India. In Pakistan, it was an Islamicization, so Qawwali and Sufi music came to represent Punjabi music in Pakistan. As a result, we lost the common thread which was rag based knowledge. Of course, in Gurbani and Shabad Kirtan, that is a very important presence still. And the Rababis were another community who were affected by partition. But I think the stereotypes we have today accounted for by the colonial imagination, which was then reframed after independence.
Okay, Radhaji. Now, let me come to a very basic question.
Yes.
Which is little theoretical, at the same time which I would ask for the sake of my viewers about the reconstruction of the past, especially regarding music. So, what do we mean by the social history in general and the social history of music in particular? Secondly, as Punjab has been an entry point, as you had rightly pointed out in the earlier question, into the Indian subcontinent. So, there are many, there is a variety of languages spoken as well as written in Punjab. So, what kind of sources did you use to reconstruct the social history of music in colonial Punjab?
So, I think social history is very important because it gives us a picture of the everyday life of people, as opposed to mainstream conventional political history, which is concerned with kings and statesmen, usually powerful men, histories of powerful men who are governing empires, conquering territories. Social history is more micro level, everyday level, and it looks at different social groups. And so, we could look at a social history of something like the police and see who were the communities who joined the police force. So, this is social history is a method which is very important in reconstructing how people lived their lives in the past, to get a bullock cart view of history as opposed to a sort of aeroplane view of history, where you look at the overall changes over a long period, but we get a sense of how everyday material realities were with social history. And as far as Punjab is concerned, social history would look at different groups, different social economic, but also different caste groups, and how they changed with time with different rulers. Say, how did things shift with Maharaja Ranjit Singh's reign to the East India Company to the British Raj. So, this is how we look at social history. Punjab, you are quite right, especially the colonial period, we find multiple languages, and even before that. So, apart from Punjabi Gurmukhi, which we also know is written also in the Shahmukhi script, I also looked at, of course, English sources, Hindi sources, which were there was a vast quantity of sources in the Hindi language, which became popular in the 19th century in Punjab, especially with the language politics which came in with colonialism, where languages were associated with certain communities. So, a major part of my book and research looks at the Hindu social reform and the Arya Samaj, who published a lot of song pamphlets and books in Hindi Devanagari. But before that, we have lots of material in Persian, and not just the court records of the rulers. So, not just the court records of Maharaja Ranjit Singh in Persian, but we also have qissas written in Persian. All of this material I have not really looked at in detail. I have looked at it in translation because I can't read Persian, but we also have Braj Bhasha and Braj Bhasha written in Gurmukhi. So, many texts, like there was a text from 1681 before Maharaja Ranjit Singh called Buddhi Prakash Darpan, which was written by Diwan Lachiram, and it looks at different ragas, and he came to Lahore and sat and wrote a musical treatise. It's written in Braj Bhasha but in the Gurmukhi script. So there's a lot of multilingual overlapping spheres, which makes it quite difficult for historians of pre-47 Punjab to write histories. Even here in Patiala, from the ruling house, we had beautiful manuscripts written in Persian, in Urdu, of course in Gurmukhi and Punjabi. So there's multiple languages, and that is really the challenge and the reward of doing research on Punjab.
So Radha ji is pointing out at a very interesting aspect about the history of Punjab and about the archival sources of Punjab, that the sources which a historian has to consult can be not only in many languages, but at the same time one language source can be found in multiple scripts. So it is not that the language proficiency is required for a historian. At the same time, a historian has to be quite equipped with the knowledge of so many orthographic traditions like Gurumukhi, Persian, Devanagari and others. Radhaji, another great feature which I could find of your book is that it is rich of illustrations. Yes. And that reminds me of typical phrase by Sandria Freitag, that history needs to be taken a visual turn. Your book is rich with visual sources. So would you tell us, our viewers, a little about the visual sources and the effort you had to put in to acquire those sources? Yes.
Before I share my efforts, I just want to point out that the biggest visual source in South Asia are the miniature paintings, of course, and the Pahadi paintings in what was called by the British colonial rulers was called the so-called Punjab Hills, have produced so much rich paintings which feature a lot of musicians and dancers. The late Professor B.N. Goswami has of course changed the field by researching Nansukh of Guler and other painters, but he is the first one who wrote a paper and said that the Pahadi courts have so much visual material on musicians and dancers, especially female performers, but he said we don't find enough reference to them in the archives, in the textual written records. As opposed to this, at Maharaja Ranjit Singh's court, we find so much written textual references to the courtesans and to the musicians and performers, but not enough paintings. So yes, there are many paintings. After British colonialism, there was company painting, and there was a great interest in understanding the different occupations of Punjab. So the British colonial masters would commission many albums or handbooks of the different tribes and castes, different occupations of Punjab. So in that we find a potter, a Maulvi teaching in a madrasa, in a school, or a dhobi, or a musician, or an acrobat, or a natani doing gymnastics. So we find images like this in the record. Much of this is of course located in London, which is why I did my PhD there, but there is a rich archive here in Indian Punjab, but also in Lahore Museum. So I looked at paintings from all these different sources to kind of search the musicians from Maharaja Ranjit Singh's court to the Patiala Darbar.
So Radhaji, now let me come to the main 4 chapters of your book. Your book begins with the court of Maharaja Ranjit Singh, the music and dance at the court of Maharaja Ranjit Singh, or let me call it both Mausiki and Raqs. And it ends with two princely courts of Patiala and Kapurthala. So, would you please explain what difference came with regard to the patronage of music and musicians from the pre-mutiny court to the post-mutiny courts?
So, I think the main difference I found was that in the records on Maharaja Ranjit Singh's court, while he patronized Shabad and Kirtan and Gurbani music, and Kirit Singh at SOAS has done a whole PhD on Gurbani music at Ranjit Singh's court, the larger number of references are to Mirasis and courtesans who were in a sense outside this tradition and were performing a more cosmopolitan, for want of a better word, secular kind of rag music at the court. At the Patiala Darbar, for the period I have looked at, which is later 19th century, which is after the mutiny, we find a greater number of references to ragis and rababis and less to courtesans and tawaif and baijis, which is not to say there weren't there at the Patiala court, but the slant had moved. And I think this is also due to the musical reform projects launched by people like the Marathi reformer Pandit Paluskar, who put music within a devotional strain. He wanted to popularize music, make it something which middle class families learnt, and he did that by putting it in a religious devotional character. And so the Patiala court was also patronizing this kind of music, which was a hybrid between cosmopolitan secular kind of music, which we saw earlier at Lahore court, and a more devotional Gurbani Kirtan.
So, you talked about the musical reform movements supported by the social religious reform movement.
Yes.
So, in your book, the third chapter talks about not only the social religious reforms, especially about Arya Samaj, and it also talks about music, urbanity and public. How music comes from courts to cities.
Yes. Yes.
So, I would like you to talk a little about the reformist project, what it was, in what ways it influenced the musical scenario, and what kind of public, not just singing public, but patronizing public, listening public, or I would say print public, emerged with a new music coming to the cities?
That's a lovely question. I think print public is most important, most crucial for framing the modernization of music, because in South Asia, in our music traditions, we don't have notation. So, we don't learn by writing or notation, we learn in the oral tradition. And Paluskar and others tried to put down a notation system and make schools where they would train middle class students and try to sort of make music accessible outside the gharana system, where you learn from an ustad or a pandit. And in fact, Paluskar came from Maharashtra, and the first place he opened his school for music, Gandharv Mahavidyalaya, was in Lahore, and this is where he met with the biggest success. And after Lahore, then he went to Bombay and set up the schools there. This shows us that there was an eager public, especially amongst the Hindu upper caste middle class groups, who wanted to sort of reform music, reform religion, and have music as part of this newly reformed religion. So, lot of song textbooks were rewritten. So, Sichniya, which are sung at weddings and which are full of, say, lustful themes, and where there is teasing of the groom side, the bride side, which is very popular, These were rewritten as bhajans by one woman called Mai Bhagwati, who was a missionary of the Arya Samaj. So there were a lot of these attempts to rewrite music, to put it within, to use old melodies, rewrite them, put it in a more devotional context, and this appealed to the middle classes, and they started learning this kind of music.
So, another interesting chapter of your book
Yes.
is on colonial ethnographies
Yes.
of the, I would call them hereditary musicians, but lower caste hereditary performers which are known as mirasis, and the female side can be generically is called in a generic way as Kanjari. So, the thing and very interestingly I found that they appear in colonial ethnographies, because as you have argued that they were the repositories of the oral lore or oral tales or the folk treasure. And you also talk about that they were the people who actually kind of permeated between the two spheres of popular and classical music.
Yes.
So, I would like you to tell us little about mirasis.
I think it's a great question, and it's fitting that the last question is on mirasis, because they are the most important community for keeping the musical traditions of Punjab alive. As you mentioned, they cross the boundary between folk and classical. They of course are repositories of folk knowledge, and all our folklore in Punjab comes from mirasis. They were the bards or storytellers. So, in the evenings in villages they would tell stories, kissas. They were also genealogists, so they would keep the family trees and genealogies, and they would be consulted, before any wedding was fixed. So, they were very important in the patron-client system of the caste system. While they were very important and they had a lot of this oral and folk knowledge, they were also feared for this reason by the upper castes, who felt that the mirasis could, in the words of Prakash Tandon, reduce a good man to rags before anyone, in front of anyone. So, there was the fear of the mirasis speaking truth to power, and they could make jokes, and through riddles they could pull the leg of anyone. So, this comedic element, this wit, but at the same time they also knew rag music. And so, Mr. Ashwini Kumar, who modernized the Harvallabh Music Festival of Jalandhar, he was, as a child, his father wanted his children in Lahore to learn music, and and this was an elite middle class family who wanted to enjoy music, learn music for modern reasons, but he employed a mirasi to teach the children music, and the mirasi knew everything about rag, except it wasn't formalized or written down in the way, say, Pandit Paluskar did. So, I think the mirasis bring a lot of richness to the table, and in the colonial period, colonial folklorists like Richard Temple were very interested in collecting folklore. So, they went to the mirasis, interviewed them, and wrote down the folk tales. But they did not respect the mirasis. They furthered the upper caste disdain of the mirasis, which the upper caste Punjabis had. The colonial masters even increased that disdain and ignored the real conditions of the mirasis. So, as a result, the mirasis started going into other professions and left the musicianship. So, today we find it is difficult for mirasis to survive.
Well, Radhaji, I think the time doesn't permit us, but I had many more questions. I wanted to know about what partition did to the musical heritage of Punjab, and what have been the post-colonial trajectories of music across the borders. But let me congratulate you for this great book, and it is the only book which talks about the social history of music, especially about the colonial times in undivided Punjab. So, with the present day political compulsions, it has become very difficult for the South Asian scholars living in South Asia to research about the undivided Punjab, but Radhaji could make it, and she just not could make it, she has done it wonderfully, and I would recommend this book to all those who are interested in any way about the social history of music, because it is a landmark. As we started reading social history of music with Janki Bakle, Lakshmi Subramanian, Amanda Wiedman, and now Radhaji could do, and she has done wonderfully, the social history of music in colonial Punjab. So, thank you all. See you for another very interesting session on music history sometime later.